Anirodhamanutpadamanuच्छedamashashvatam Anekarthamananarthamanagamam Yah pratitya samutpadam prapanchopashamam shivam Deshayamasa sambuddhastam vande vatatam varam Nasvato na viparato nadvabhyam napyahetutah Utpanna jatu vidyante bhavah kvachana kechana. Welcome back everyone to our Dharmapada session. It is wonderful that you are using this difficult time for such a noble purpose, to acquaint yourself with a teaching that is very ancient and yet always fresh and always relevant for our own satisfaction, contentment, but also to live in a way that is more beneficial to others, that allows us to be more attentive to others. We're now in the second chapter of 26 chapters, some of these being quite short, so don't worry, there will be an end to the Dharmapada. So I will first read the Pali and then, as always, the translation and a little bit of explanation. The context is the state of appamada. In Sanskrit, that would be appramada, which means the absence of heedlessness, total attentiveness to everything, to every moment of experience. This, according to Buddha, is a state of immortality, a state of absolute clarity, a state from which no longer any kind of negative emotions arise, because the attentiveness is so vivid, is so powerfully present moment to moment, that no negative emotion can stay for long, but it is not being suppressed either. So very important to understand that the Buddha's absolute attentiveness is not a suppression of anything. It is simply a vivid, clear awareness or mindfulness, moment to moment to moment to moment, not allowing any slipping from that state. Later in the Dharmapada, he calls this the Achyutam Padam, the state from where one does not waver. Te jhayino satatika nicham dadhaparakkama pusanti dhira nibbanam yogakkemanuttaram. Such permanent meditators of firm effort, insightful, touch nirvana itself, which is the unexcelled acquisition and maintenance. Such perpetual meditators of firm effort, insightful, touch nirvana itself, the unexcelled acquisition and maintenance or sustenance. The ordinary human mind is always engaged in two things. What can I gain and what can I maintain? Isn't it? This is called yoga kshema. Yoga kema. It also comes in the Bhagavad Gita and many other scriptures. What can I obtain and what can I maintain? If you carefully observe, carefully analyze your mode of abiding in this world, you will see that there is some truth to this. We are always trying to protect something, or we are trying to get something. It is one of these two. And according to Buddha, a perpetual meditator, that is someone who is always attentive, not just in a meditative posture, but always. So, after finishing this Dharmapada session, I will not suddenly be unattentive and, just sway or prostrate to our shrine here and almost make the statues fall over because of my lack of attentiveness. I will always be attentive. This is a true story. One of our friends who came from the UK, all of you know him, but I won't name him. He came here and he came to the top floor of our house where we have our shrine, and I was sitting, and there were a couple of people, 4 or 5 of them, and they all did a prostration to our deities. And this friend of ours, whom all of you know, he did such a intense prostration that the whole shrine shook, because he didn't realize that the carpet is that there is a carpet, and that if he's going to drop himself on the carpet in such a way, the carpet will slip and then will push the table on which the deities are, and then will push the deities over, right? So this is called lack of attentiveness, lack of awareness, where we go, sort of through our day like King Louis in the Jungle Book. He is this orangutan, if you remember from your childhood, and he's just always doing whatever comes to his mind. I'm joking, but you see, a perpetual meditator is someone who never loses that attentiveness, never loses that clarity. And then, after many, many, many weeks, many months of practice, a mysterious clarity comes out from within. It's very important, my dears, that you understand this. It comes out through practicing. It is like a hidden jewel, and when you continue again and again to be absolutely attentive to every moment of experience, whether you are praying, or you are cooking, or you are working, or you are enjoying. Some people ask me, can I do this while watching Netflix? Of course, absolutely. The difference is just, instead of being completely absorbed by what you're watching, you maintain the attentiveness towards the moment of your experience, towards that occurrence of your experience. And then, when you continue always to do this, a secret clarity comes out from within. That is called touching nirvana, because that clarity, in its deepest nature, is nirvana. That is the mystery of it. And when you, for a moment, taste that clarity, or you experience it a little bit, then you know, this is where the path leads towards. Therefore, all I need to do is to continue being so attentive always, moment to moment, to whatever occurs. And there's a story here that once the Buddha was staying at Rajagriha, and there were 2 boys. They were grandsons of a banker. which is interesting. It means that in ancient times we also had bankers and financial experts. So this banker had two grandsons, and he was inspired by the Buddha. The names of the two boys were Mahapantaka and Chūdapantaka. And Mahapantaka, as is often the case, being the older of the two, was very confident, and he listened to one of the discourses of the Buddha and was so inspired that he joined the Buddha's movement. And his younger brother, Chūdapantaka, was a little dull. And the Buddha explained this, that Chūdapantaka, in one of his previous existences, used to make fun of someone who was dull. And then, sort of as a consequence of that, in this life, as Chūdapantaka himself was dull. So, careful whom you make fun of. And Chūdapantaka could not even memorize a single teaching in 4 months, whereas Mahapantaka was already a great meditator, and people were predicting that Mahapantaka would become an arhat. Arhat is a realized person very quickly, whereas Chūdapantaka was still not quite sure. So what is this about? What I need to be attentive, or what I need to do? You know, sometimes that's how people are. Don't make fun of them. Careful. And Mahapantaka, the older brother, was very disappointed in his younger brother and told him, "You are not worthy of this path." And at that time, the Buddha came to know about this. And a householder called Jivaka, who was a resident of this city, invited the Buddha and his monks and nuns for a meal, as was very common in ancient times, and also today in Indian tradition. It is very auspicious to invite a yogi, a great master, to one's home, and also the other people, to treat them to a meal. And Mahapantaka was in charge of saying who should come for this meal, and he left out his younger brother because he thought he's not worthy of this. And when Chūdapantaka, the younger brother, came to know that he was not on the guest list, how mean is that? You're not on the guest list. He thought, I will leave this and I will become a householder again. I'll take a wife and lead a normal life, because there's no point. These people are being mean to me. They're excluding me. Something I have seen among spiritual people. So these are probably very true stories, because I've seen that spiritual people, they sometimes tend to create an in-group and an out-group. And there are certain criteria. Sometimes it's not clear what exactly these are, how you become an insider and an outsider, but it happens a lot, more than among normal people. So that's a scary phenomenon. So in any case, the Buddha was observing this happening, and he then got hold of Chūdapantaka and told him that he should sit outside and he should take a piece of cloth and he should keep repeating a mantra, but not some mystical mantra. Rather, the mantra was just Rajo Haranam, removing the dust or the dirt, removing the dirt. And he should keep rubbing the cloth while repeating this, removing the dirt, removing the impurity, or Rajah can just mean the stain. It can also mean stain. Removing the stain, removing the stain. And he should keep repeating this, keep repeating this. And This story reminded me a little bit of a film I saw as a child called the Karate Kid. I don't know if it's not your generation, most of you here, but it was a film about a Japanese karate master who lives in America, and he teaches a young boy basics of karate, and he also has to keep doing the same movement. You remember the film? To keep doing, and initially he doesn't understand the point of it. And then with time, he realizes that this movement is actually, it increases his concentration, but also is the very movement he's going to do in karate. And in this story, it just reminded me of this. In this story, Chudapantaka comes to realize through his constant movement, Rajoharanam, removing the stain, he comes to realize that the cloth becomes pure through the repeated, concentrated activity. You see? Always continuing to repeat the practice. And this increases his concentration. And then he remembers one teaching of the Buddha suddenly. Impermanence. That nothing is permanent, nothing stays as it is. And he realizes that through the repeated movement of rubbing the cloth is changing. With every movement, it is changing. It's becoming a little more clean and a little more clean. And suddenly, because he keeps rubbing, it even begins to disintegrate. Because that happens when you rub too much, isn't it? And he begins to understand the teaching. Oh, everything changes. Everything is impermanent. And because of his increased concentration, he applies that to himself, and he realizes that his body is also impermanent, and that his mind is also impermanent, and that his emotions are also impermanent, and that his own emotional states are impermanent, and that even his dullness is impermanent. Everything about him changes. And then his mind becomes radiant. And when people came out from this meal, they saw a different Chudapantaka. They saw a Chudapantaka full of clarity, full of radiance. And the Buddha said, Chudapantaka, come along, come along. And in the evening, he asked Chudapantaka to give the discourse, and that he should talk about the insight he had had. And everyone was shocked and baffled. What? The dull boy should give the discourse. And Chudapantaka, with his increased clarity, of course he was a little nervous before, but the Buddha wanted to throw him into the cold water, that he should now talk about what he had understood. And bravely and confidently, he spoke about impermanence. Beautiful story. And as I have said many times, I really think these stories are historical, and it shows us what kind of a man the Buddha was. He was always protecting the weaker one, never looking at the strong one, making fun of the other, but he was always looking at the weaker one, and he was always paying attention to the strength in people, the hidden strength, the hidden potential. And we should try to do the same. We should never think that someone is incapable, or that someone is such and such character, because everything is impermanent. My dears, I have seen incredible things happen to people who begin to practice, who begin to pay attention to their minds. They really transform. And A person who before was extremely dull and perhaps was not capable of even understanding what a mental state is. After a few years, 2 years or so, 3 years, that very same person has a radiant mind and is capable of giving a discourse, is capable of speaking and giving wisdom to others. So the teaching here is not only that practice makes you the master, rajoharanam, rajoharanam, the continuous rubbing of the stain. Not only practice makes you the master, also what the Buddha did, paying attention to the potential in others. This is called mudita. One day we will have a retreat on mudita. But I'll just explain a little, outline it a little. Mudita means to appreciate the potential in others, the talent that is evident, but also that which is potential, the potential talent. So, very important, my dears, never to think something is just bad, a person is just like this. Always see where the person could reach. That brings out the best in people. Then you are like the Buddha. Yes? So now the next verse. Uttanavato satimato suchikammassa nisammakarino sanyatassa dhamma jivino appamattassa yasobhavadhati. The renown of one who is free from heedlessness benefits others, of one who is energetic, mindful, of pure conduct, acting with consideration for others, with self-control, who lives in accordance with the Dharma. The renown of one who is free from heedlessness benefits others, of one who is energetic, mindful, of pure conduct, acting with consideration, self-control, who lives in accordance with Dharma. People want to become famous today. That is really the culture of the moment. It is really, I want to put my picture on Instagram and I want as many likes as possible. I want that my post gets as many reactions as possible. It is really the moment we are in this 21st century. But for the Buddha, renown should be something that benefits others. You see, then it is nothing negative, then it is something beautiful. When there is a positive trajectory, when someone becomes well known because of the benefit that he or she gives others, it is wonderful. Think of someone like the Dalai Lama or Mahatma Gandhi or someone positive, someone auspicious. The renown that spreads from them inspires others. But then on the other hand, think of someone where the renown is sort of on the negative side. I don't want to name, because you know what kind of people there are out there. You know, where the fame sort of makes people divided and full of negativity and full of hatred or depression. That's a renown that has only itself as the benefit, that does not benefit others. So important when you have a desire to become famous, consider for a moment the Buddha's teaching that that renown, that fame you seek, does it benefit others? Or are you trying to become famous for your beautiful hair or your beautiful eyes, to gain some inner kick? I personally find it is very sad that a whole generation of youth are obsessed with themselves, almost narcissistically. It's not you probably, but it's the next generation who are all the time, it's just about the look nowadays. And a lot of young youth are in depression because they don't get enough likes. There are studies about this now. So I think it is high time for this ancient wisdom to come back, that fame for the sake of your own narcissism is not a good thing. Uttanena, appamadena, samyamena, damena cha. Deepam kahiratha medhavi, yam ogho nabhi kirati. With energy or enthusiasm, with mindfulness or awareness, with self-control and restraint, an intelligent person makes an island for himself or herself which no flood can overcome. With energy, with mindfulness, with self-control and restraint, an intelligent person makes an island for themselves which no flood can overcome. What is the flood? The flood are these negative experiences of life. Oh my goodness, all this horror that is going on right now. It's terrible. It's terrible. Internal emotional conflicts and external problems, and now a pandemic. Oh, it's terrible. That is samsara, my dears. That is the flood of samsara. But when you are completely established in your own awareness, when you are constantly, from the moment you wake up, through every moment of the day till the last one, and even in your dreams, when you are fully attentive, that becomes an island that no flood can overcome. No experience, whatever, can flood you. You are established completely, like you are rock solid. When that inner island of awareness is absolutely stable, no affliction can harm it, no matter what. So the Buddha asks you to prepare such an island for yourself. And here there is a story. This is a very famous story. I didn't know it is from the Buddha himself, that there was a practitioner, a yogi, and he had a little hut outside of the city, as was tradition in ancient India, that the yogis were always living a little bit outside the city. And people used to give him food, so he would go make his rounds and he would get some milk and a little bit of food. It was tradition that you couldn't get more than you can receive in eight palms, like this, not more than that. And then he would put it in his begging bowl, and he would go back to his little hut, and he would practice meditation. And one day, a very generous person suggested that instead of us giving you milk, why don't we give you a cow? And then you can have your own milk. So then the yogi said, all right, it's very generous of you. So he walked away with a cow, and he went to his hut, and he had to tie the cow to the tree. And then he thought, oh, that's very mean, because the cow should be allowed to roam. So he made a fence around his hut, and then the cow used to roam there. And so he was constantly thinking about the cow now, rather than about his meditation. And so he went on some of his rounds again, and someone said that instead of us giving you rice, if you have your own little, your own little rice field, you could make your own rice. So essentially, the yogi became a farmer, but he wasn't fully aware of it yet. He still thought he's a yogi. And then someone said, you know what? Wouldn't it be a good idea if you had a wife? Then she could help you with your farm. So essentially, he just became a normal person, but he still thought he's a yogi. And, he still had his little half an hour in the morning, to practice. And then, of course, the wife, as is quite common, she thought that it would be nice if we had children as well. So they also had a child, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's your life, right? Isn't it? Which is fine. But the Buddha told the story because you have to be careful about the decisions you take. So you have to see, of course, the Buddha was a monk. So he was telling this story to the monks. What can happen if you take little decisions and then they draw you into attachments. But in your context, don't take it to mean that you shouldn't have, your own income and all that. That's not the meaning here. It is just you translate this to your own context. All right. You have your life, obviously, and it's not a good idea to go around begging in the UK. Right? So I don't know if it's legal to beg. In Switzerland, it's illegal, actually. So you couldn't do this in Switzerland. Anyway, but think about the decisions that create more attachments, more entanglements. Every time Tripura Sundari wants to make a new acquisition, I always sort of apply this principle. Is it really needed? Do we need to buy this? Right? Do we need to create some new attachment? Then if we have more properties, more possessions, that means we need to clean more. It means we need to do more, etc., etc. So apply it to your own life. Of course, our children have all kinds of ideas. Like they want to have rabbits and goats and snakes and, so a dog, right? Which means walking 4 hours a day and all those different attachments. So be very conscious about your decisions. Yes? Pamadam anuyunjanti bala dummedhino jana appamadam cha medhavi dhanam setham varakkati. This is very mean. The Buddha says, only immature, unintelligent people fall into heedlessness. They fall into negligence. Whereas intelligent people, they protect their awareness like someone guarding a most excellent treasure. Only immature, unintelligent people fall into heedlessness or negligence, whereas intelligent people protect their awareness like someone guarding a most excellent treasure. If one forgets to watch one's own treasure of awareness, the thieves will come and take it away. Only immature people take a whole lifetime to understand this. They give in to anger, even though the anger makes them suffer afterwards. They give in to greed, even though the greed makes them suffer afterwards. They give in to pride, the sense of superiority, even though eventually that makes them dissatisfied, that makes them discontented. And the worst, of course, is envy, which is so subtle that most often we do not even notice it. And if we are not attentive to all things, to all inner, outer, secret occurrences, we will just act from that. Our whole life will transpire based on these emotions rather than based on the freedom of awareness. And slowly our treasure will be gone. Others will be the victim of our constant irritation, our constant dissatisfaction. Others will be the victim of our envy. We will harm them. There will be discord in our families, in our communities, in the whole world. Whereas the opposite is the freedom of awareness that recognizes these states as they come, knowing how the consequence will turn out if we allow them to reign freely, if we do not observe them, if we do not witness them, if we do not slowly but surely dissolve them with that awareness, and then give rise to maitri, metta, the loving kindness that embraces the whole world like one's own child. That is the Buddha's definition of maitri. Seeing the whole world, all beings, like they were one's own child. With that affection, our enemies, our friends, our family, and ourselves. Seeing even yourself like you were your own child, and caring like you would for an only child. Imagine that level of attentiveness towards everything, towards others, towards yourself, towards every moment of experience occurring. Such a care that you don't even want to harm a flower, that you have even the sense of little beetle walking past that shouldn't be crushed, that you have this beautiful, constant stream of joyful caring for everything. That is the most excellent treasure. And to cultivate it, to develop it, you have to have the highest awareness of all the states that would produce negative outcomes. Do you see that? If you can recognize the negative state before it produces too many results, before it produces a new consequence. And if you then dissolve the negative state and give rise to the Maitri, the stream of kindness, then you are walking towards nirvana. Because the clarity of your awareness will slowly become vast like the sky, and the depth of your Maitri will become deep like the ocean. And as the previous verse said, it will be like an island which no flood can overcome. How amazing that it is in your hand, to have that incredible joy. Now one more verse which states exactly this, and then we will go to some question answers. Ma pamadam anuyunjeta ma kamarati santavam appamatto hijayanto papoti vipulam sukham. Don't become a prey of heedlessness, negligence. Don't lose yourself in desires and pleasures. A meditator who is free from heedlessness attains great joy. Don't fall prey to heedlessness. Don't lose yourself in desires and pleasures. A meditator who is free from heedlessness attains great joy. That is his promise, and it is infinitely true. Don't lose yourself in all these things occurring. Don't allow anger, desires, and confusion to catch you. Recognize them. Be like a king or a queen in your life that cannot be ruled by others, but who is ruled only by love, who is ruled only by an all-embracing stream of Maitri, which automatically gives you joy and gives joy to others as well. Now let us have some question answers. Please feel free to write them in the chat, or also, if you like, you can speak. Any doubts? Or you can always ask whatever you wish. Or about Netflix, whatever you have as a question. Have we left you speechless? So someone asks, can someone on the path find themselves more sensitive to violent things? Absolutely. To violent things on films, etc. Absolutely, absolutely. I can barely watch anything, sort of negative, where even if it's just a film where someone is suffering or where there is violence going on, absolutely, because we become so sensitive to everything, so attentive that we don't want to watch the violence. And it's so unneeded, it's so unnecessary. There are many studies that show if there were not so many violent films and all the violent games and all these things, people would be less violent. It is really the violence that is presented externally that then also increases the inner violence. Look at it psychologically. If we constantly show you violence, it will create violence. If we constantly show you tragic emotions, that generates those emotions. Also, Tripura Sundari can barely watch these emotional things, isn't it? She always has to cry. So, yes, you're right, definitely. Of course, there are some people who enjoy the brutal things, but then you have to ask what is in your mind. And if it doesn't affect you, that's of course fine. All right. So if we have no further questions. Yes?
Hi, Āchārya Vidyābhāskar, happy Diwali. I've got a question, and it kind of leads on beautifully from the previous question, actually. As a practitioner of yoga, there's something which always intrigues me, is the kind of martial arts, especially around the sort of Buddhist culture and so forth. And there's so many sort of different forms of martial arts. And then I find it difficult to reconcile that, which is a form of violence, with I guess the sort of practices of Maitri, meditation, ahimsa, and karuna. So you could possibly shine some light.
It's an interesting question. Very good question. Of course, martial arts came from India as well, as you maybe know. There's a South Indian martial arts tradition, and the Chinese stories about where martial arts come from also connected to India. So we can say we brought it. But if you have practiced martial art, what I did, you see, as a younger person, I used to go into different courses of martial arts, not in order to become a great martial artist, but about to learn a little bit of each, to understand, sort of what it is about. So I looked at Wing Chun, and I looked at Aikido, and I looked at Kendo, which is with the sword, which is a Japanese one, and then, of course, as a younger boy, I looked at judo as well. And then, so I looked at different things just to understand what it is about. And the thread through all of them was always, it is not about attacking. It is actually about transforming the inner aggression, and that the highest consequence of martial art should be that no fight takes place. This was always the thread that I saw throughout these different approaches, that the highest form is that no fight at all is necessary. And I could always also sort of recognize that the people who participated in these sessions seemed to be less aggressive somehow. It was interesting to see. But I don't know if there are studies. I also like to be academic about things. I don't know if there are studies about does the practice of martial art actually make people less aggressive? It would be interesting if there are studies about this. Does it create an ability to control oneself, to restrain oneself? Would be interesting to see. But I do think that this is the context in China and Japan. The context of the meditative traditions would be to master one's own inner aggressions.
Yep, thank you, Āchārya. That answers it quite beautifully. And I guess, to channelize, gives people a platform to channelize their energy.
Yes, correct. Yes, correct. And happy Diwali to all of you, of course. Diwali being the festival of lights, where the inner light comes out, and we hope that this inner light also manifests in the world, that the world reaches some balance again. Then someone asks, does the pleasure derived from material or previously pleasurable things lessen the more we practice? Yes and no. You see, the mind is a great mystery. I would say the pleasure is even increased, but it is more conscious. So perhaps before one has practiced at all, before one has even heard about awareness or mindfulness, the pleasure would be very unconscious. It would be sort of, I'm always surprised when I see, the young people, they're walking with the bottle of beer or something else. They're walking through the streets and they're shouting, like I don't know. Sorry? Hulk. Like the Hulk. So I'm always surprised by that there's some unconsciousness there. But I'm not judging that. I'm just observing it. There's some unconsciousness there. And it is a kind of pleasure for sure. It's a kind of pleasure, but it is very unconscious. Whereas the meditator can take, once in a while, the Prasundari brings these excellent chocolates. Switzerland is famous for chocolates. And of course, we try to be sort of vegan, but sometimes we cheat. And then she brings these excellent chocolates. And then as a meditator, when you take that and you let it dissolve in your mouth, and you see, I always try to lose weight, so I just take one, not 10 or 3. And you experience the pleasure differently. You see? It is much more conscious if you pay attention to every minute occurrence of how this sweet is dissolving on your tongue. The experience of it becomes so conscious, you understand? Every minute change, and also how the pleasure fades in the end. If you do this as an experiment, my dears, this is also from the scriptures, you put a sweet in your mouth and try to watch. Where is the moment that the pleasure ends? The exact moment. Can you identify it? Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And then the exact moment it ends. It is so powerful to recognize. And then you realize that the pleasure can continue within you. That pleasure is actually independent of the object. But of course, it's not a permanent sweet, but the pleasure, the experience of pleasure is not actually dependent upon the object. But that takes a while to experience. But try this. Or similarly, the pleasure you can get when you see a beautiful flower or a beautiful animal even. Like let's say a cat comes up. I always go walking and we have so many cats. And there's something mysterious about cats. They sense spiritual energies. This is my theory, but it is really true. That when you practice a lot, the cats, they really sense that. There is a reason why ancient people always had cats and tigers and leopards in the temples. And then the cats, they always come up to me and then I interact with them. And there's something so beautiful about a cat. Now, you see, a normal person who doesn't meditate also senses that, of course. They go, oh, sweet little cat, right? But the interaction when you are a meditator is so beautiful. The incredible consciousness in that cat is incredible. It's something amazing. So as a meditator, the pleasure you get from that, interacting with that beautiful creature, admiring every movement of its consciousness, every movement of its body, every occurrence of its consciousness, is a different kind of pleasure, you see? So, my dear, it is not that we lessen, it's not that the pleasure lessens, it becomes more profound. It becomes much more experienced almost. It becomes much more conscious. But then, yes, of course, in comparison to those who are on the road, are sort of swaying from the alcohol, yeah, it's a different kind, yes. I couldn't do that. I just couldn't. I could try. We could once get together and we could pretend that we're also going through the street, and like the Hulk, we can see. But I don't know if I could get pleasure from that. I don't know. So it is a different kind of pleasure. So then let us finish here and try to experience pleasure like this, all of you. Go through your weekend with that kind of pleasure. Those of you who are thin, get yourself some chocolate or some other sweet or some Indian sweet. Those who are not so thin, maybe get something else, that doesn't increase your waistline. And then experience the pleasure of that, but very consciously. All right? So we should also get some sweets. Then wishing you all a wonderful weekend and a happy Diwali, Deepavali, a happy festival of lights. those who don't know what Diwali is, it is an ancient festival of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, where we light candles or deepas outside our home to symbolize that we overcome the darkness of this season, the darkness of our own ignorance, and we bring light and joy to everybody in the whole world. Maybe you can also light some candles around your home to celebrate that with us. Hari Om, everyone. Be full of joy and absolute awareness, full of kindness. Wishing you all a great weekend. Namaste.